Alright guys, so welcome back. Today's video I think is a long time coming. I want to go ahead and go over the history of Zenkais and talk about their rise to prominence, where it all began, and then talk about their fall from grace, and then their rise, and then kind of rise back again after another fall lately. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Today's video like goal will be 1,000, and we definitely need everybody that watches the video to hit that thumbs up so we can hit our goal. When you're done, please consider doing so. And everybody listening, I would like to hear from you guys the answer to this question. Today's question will be, which Zenkai defined your experience in Dragon Ball Legends the most? These are all of the Zenkai characters in the game. I own every single one. Which character, again, defined your Dragon Ball experience, Dragon Ball Legends experience for good or bad? Which one? Well, one of them Zenkai 6, but I'm not going to point them out. A couple of them are below. Which one defined your experience for good or bad the most? That answer to me will be Red Goku. I'll talk about why in a minute. Okay, so that being said, to really talk about Zenkais, I have to give you a little bit of history, so it's going to take a little bit of time, so bear with me. Definitely bear with me. So to start things off, you may have noticed, but most games, especially gacha games, have a balance change system where they'll take an old character, they'll rework their stats, add in new abilities, and basically give them a second breath of life to where they can be used on newer teams, or they'll bring them back in different. It just depends on the gameplay style, but the point is every game kind of has gacha games and non-gacha games too, but a lot of games have a balance change system, and this game was no different. They actually initially had literal balance changes where they would take these characters and improve upon them. They did maybe like 3 or 4 waves of those, and they weren't too common, but they would every now and again touch them up. But eventually that system does get left by the wayside in turn for Zenkais, and I'm going to talk about what the issue was with balance changes in just a second. So let's talk about balance changes a little bit more. So they would change their stats, they would change their kits, pretty typical stuff, but one thing they did do that they don't do today anymore with Zenkais, but I'm hoping that they decide to go back to, is change the abilities. They would change the abilities. I don't remember which it was for Vegeta initially on launch prior to his balance change, but I'm pretty sure one of these tag boosts was not here in this Z ability. Saiyan or Frieza Force, one of them was not here. Same applies to other characters. I think Pan was just one of the tags, and I believe she's Sun Family and Girls now. There are other characters they did that too, and you know, they would improve characters overall, so that was nice. But the issue was that with the balance changes was those characters would fall off extremely quickly. They would be the talk of the point for, they would be the talk of the town, excuse me, for like a week, and then they would fall off. Now coincidentally, this has been an issue with Zenkais of late, right? That's been an issue of Zenkais of late because the power scale changed. We'll talk about that in a second, but that would be the problem. So instead of this, they decided on 2 things. For one, they decided they wanted to make the next form of balance changes something that they can monetize, and they introduced Zenkais with this guy, Blue Broly, and Green Beerus. Okay, so that is where it all began, those 3, and they would be extremely monetized. You have to have played in that version of the game in that time period to really understand how outraged the community was for this, because a couple of reasons. For one, the monetization of something that was already free and the sheer amount of cost. However, they made it worth your while because the stats would spike heavily because of the introduction of more boost boards. These were not here. They didn't have all of these extra ones that you unlock with Zenkais, so the stats would go up a little bit, but they now would go up like crazy. This Goku actually still has a decent blast attack stat, ironically, despite being one of the worst, if not the worst, Zenkai in the game. The stats would go up crazy. They would do the normal rework of all this stuff here, but they would also add the Zenkai ability and unique abilities. Now, I have said this before, you really gotta, again, go back to that time period, but I am pretty sure anyway, for the English-speaking audience, I was the originator of Zenkai boosted showcases, but I mean, that's not anything different. I could go back to Dokkan and say I'm the originator of certain things too that you guys probably watch today from other YouTubers, but that's not really, it's a point of pride, but it's not really like a flex or anything. But I'm bringing that up because this would wind up being super powerful, and I don't think when they made this, they actually intended for it to be this thing where like you could put like 3 or 4 on a team and massive, like how we do now, massive like 5-6 times Zenkai boosts on one character. You know, I don't think they intended for it to be that. I don't think they even intended for it to be something like mono purple where they got like 3 or 4 characters all getting 3 or 4 Zenkai boosts. So this winds up becoming a really good thing and a really crazy thing that winds up allowing for Zenkais to be extended, and they've actually been embracing this lately, extend the life way beyond their usability, which is something balance change characters could not do. When they were done being usable, they were not even applicable to the well, maybe if they had a decent Z ability, they'd still be on the team, but by today's standards, those characters are useless because the Z abilities, even the Z ability, is trash. But this would allow for characters to extend their usefulness far out. But I talked about the monetization and how you had to play at that time period. So I only Zenkai 7'd this guy. Why, you may ask, despite there being 3? It was because his Zenkai, all of them at that time, cost 21,000 CC on average. Yeah. So they would eventually rework the drops you would get, but I believe you used to get like 10 at a time. You know how you can get like 100 and then you can get higher than that if you're lucky on Zenkai summons now. I believe you used to get like 10 or something at this. Dude, it would cost 21,000 CC. They would eventually again rework all of that and stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that led to 2 things: a heavy payoff with the stats and all the stuff I talked about, and these characters would be definitively the best 3 characters in the game. It also opened up for content, like I said, more avenues to create content on YouTube, which I was really excited about. But I couldn't bite the bullet in Zenkai 7, all 3 of them. Goresh of today would, but Goresh back then also didn't. He only got Beerus, if I recall correctly. So like the game, it was just like, it was really hard to say I'm going to spend 21,000 CC on this. So the community was ultra outraged. Now, these characters, it felt like forever, but I believe they wound up being exclusive for 3 or 4 months with the only Zenkais in the game. Okay, so there was a heavy exclusivity on them, and they wouldn't return all that often, if I recall correctly. But even if they did, you got to be willing to shell out big bucks with 21,000 CC. But again, they were worth it, kinda, as the best characters in the game, because they were doing things other characters weren't doing. They had 2 extras, unique abilities. They had the Zenkai ability. They had the crazy stats. They were just powerful. They would blow everything up. Seriously, they would blow everything up. It was like Gohan, Beast Gohan, does this today. Some characters today do it, but it just wasn't fair. You know what I'm saying? It was that back then. So moving on from that, other characters did come out that were of note, like this guy. Which he is, Gohan's my second favorite character in the series, so trust me when I say this. I loved this guy, and I got him whenever I could. I think he was also, like I said, still 21,000 CC. But some of them were duds, or some of them started aging out pretty quickly. Like Goku started aging out kind of quickly. That Gohan wound up being a bit of a dud. There were some other characters that came out in that time period that were also 21,000 CC that were not great, that were duds. But we wind up hitting an era that is unforgettable. Wow. So I talked about blowing stuff up. so yeah, this guy would blow everything up for like a year and a half. He actually still can blow stuff up, but he just doesn't have the utility characters today have with their nullify this and cover that and just, you know, the seal this. He just doesn't have any of that. So he can't, he only has neutrality and that's it. Like he just doesn't have anything else. But he still does good damage. But anyways, he would blow everything up. Him and 18 would define this game and Zenkais in this game for a decent amount of time. Like I said, a year and a half, give or take. They would define this game's Zenkais for a long time. I don't remember if 18 or Gohan were 7,000 CC Zenkais. I believe they were higher than that. But we did eventually get that summon system reworked with the Zenkais and the drops and all that stuff, to where they would become 7,000 CC Zenkais. I'm pretty sure this one was the one that introduced that, because I remember doing a video on it, and I think Purple Vegeta followed that up. And the talk at that point was, oh, they heavily nerfed Zenkais when they made them cheaper to get, right? And it was fair. It was fair because like I said, we had some duds, but most of them were hits. Like Purple Super Saiyan 3 Goku, I can't remember if he was 7,000 CC or not, but he was also extremely powerful. Oh, I forgot to mention. I mentioned how those initial 3 were the best in the game. Beerus was definitively the best, and then that next wave with like Purple Gohan, Cooler comes in and dominates in that wave early. Cooler was super good, ultra good. Like, but I was, because they were so expensive, and I wasn't. I had already stopped wailing on this game. I was only getting them like Zenkai 3 and then working from there, getting them Zenkai 6 for a while. I wouldn't, until they got really cheap or free, I wouldn't come back in Zenkai 7 a lot of these characters. But anyways, Cooler, I wanted to give him a shout out too. There were some really good ones, but I can't talk about every single Zenkai, right? By the way, this list is in order of received, because I own every Zenkai in the game, but not order that they were Zenkai'd, as you could tell. So, we just got Pants not that long ago. She's the 3rd oldest character in the game. The 3rd oldest Zenkai already. So yeah, moving back to the 7,000 CCs, and I believe this guy was the first of those 7,000 CCs that was like, oh, actually, never mind. They're actually really solid still, and we start seeing the power go up again from there. Characters coming out, but they're still good. But at this point, since Gohan dominated the game so heavily, and again, 18, her too. The problem with 18 was people were like reluctant and hated to say that she could potentially be better than Gohan at all. But I would always call them the best 1 and 2, and I would always put respect on her name, because she was so punishing to play against. You couldn't switch versus her or anything. But the problem is, at this point, we've got these characters dominating. They've reworked the Zenkais. However, nothing is changing, right? On the high end, nothing is changing. It doesn't really matter what you're using, whether it's SS3 Gokus, the SS4 Zenkais. It doesn't really matter what you're using. At the end of the day, whether it's a new character, LF or not, this guy is dominating that character. He is still the best character in the game. It became, oh, well, why even summon for XLF when Gohan will just blow them up? And that was another issue. I talked about how they wanted to monetize the system. They gradually loosened it. They gradually made Zenkais a lot more available eventually over time, with them being pretty much completely free now, right? You have to have the character star requirement, but otherwise they're completely free otherwise if you just wait a few weeks from when they're new. But this created another issue. Gohan and other characters have come close, like Purple Broly on his initial release. Vegito Blue comes to mind. Other characters have come close, but Gohan may have been the single worst decision that they've ever made. Shout out to Bardock too, because his Zenkai is one of those two. But Gohan may have been the single worst decision that they ever made, because what he wound up doing wound up becoming an entire trickle effect for the rest of the game. He was so powerful that they decided, we have to usurp this guy. We have to usurp this guy. So eventually, this is where Zenkais just, like, they're not even worth mentioning anymore, because for a long time, they just become mid, unusable. They transition to just being Zenkai buffers. There's not really, like, some of them were decent, but they're not doing anything, right? They're not really anything crazy. Like, I like some of them, like, I like this guy Zenkai in that time period, I believe. I like Yellow Movie Goku. I liked Blue Gogeta there. I liked, who else? I like the SS4s, like I mentioned. I liked LF Piccolo's Zenkai. I liked LF Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta, which actually is kind of recent relative to the rest of the field here. Who else? There's a number of them on this list. The SS3s I might have mentioned, but it just didn't matter. So there's an entire trickle-down effect after Gohan, where in order to usurp him, they upped the ante. And they started making LF characters better than Zenkais. There was a shift. And I don't know exactly what the first Zenkai was, but it probably coincides with around the time Zenkais became free on a larger scale with the space-time event. Whichever that first Zenkai was probably around the time that it coincides with for real, because again, it had been trending that way with everything being below Gohan no matter what it was. But it had been trending that way, but I think that around the time it became completely free, we see them really make a shift to where the new characters, even at really low stars, because that was also the criticism. Why would you summon for LF Future Gohan, for example, if he's really good, but he's only like 3-star? He's not going to compete with a 14-star or Zenkai 7 Gohan. He's going to blow him up, right? So you move from there and you get this whole situation where LFs become better than Zenkais, and that's a twofold thing, because you increase the power level on those LFs and you also weaken subsequent Zenkais. So you see how the trend is, one's going up, one's going down. So you have the situation where we're in now, where you can get a character like Beast Gohan, and I'm serious, I'm double checking this, at 3-star, he blows every character on this list up. Like, I'm looking at this like that. There's not a single character here he doesn't blow up. This is all the Zenkais in the game. You see what I'm saying? There's not a single character here. So this was their plan to devalue Zenkais further and also shift the power, because the issue was people weren't summoning for new characters as often, because the Zenkais were all you would save for and summon for. People would literally tell you, myself included, hey, just wait for the next Zenkai. Just Zenkai that character. Why summon for X character? Just get the next Zenkai. So this was a problem, right? They had created, that's why I said Gohan might have been the single worst mistake they ever made in the development of this game, because he was too good. And him being so good meant that the trickle down was that all the other characters just had to be so damn good, to where we get to the point eventually where we got like the androids, the LF androids, and then we just, and when you get to that level of power with like the LF androids, and like they had already been pulling stuff out their butts at the end of last year, a year ago basically, where they're creating mechanics. Like the gauges had been out for a couple of years already, but they're finally starting to use them a little bit more with the trunks last year, the tag mechanic coming out. They're starting to give more characters cover changes. They're starting to give more characters nullify cover changes. They're starting to just create stuff, and they're still creating stuff by today's standards. But when you get to that point, you can only go up and up and up, right? That's why we now at a point where the androids come out and it's like, oh, they're incredibly powerful. But then the ultras are coming out and they're dominating the game. We see MUI and then these characters during the anniversary that are really meta defining and are really good and strong characters. And I'm not even going to really talk about the grander scale of power creep and the boost system and all that. But the point is, this heavily contributed to the downfall of Zenkais. But where did they start to rise up again? That's the real question. Prior to anniversary, we had started to see some Zenkais that would be good again. And I'm not trying to say these Zenkais that came out before this or whatever weren't good, because like I said, you could take them and use them decently. Like I thought this guy was pretty decent. You know, I thought LF Goten probably should have gotten a little bit more recognition than he did. The reason he got his Zenkai when he did, by the way, was obviously because he would have worked too well with Red Gohan. And then when he got his Zenkai, I'm pretty sure the tag was already out. So they just kind of were like, hey, you know, Tag Goku Vegeta will just replace this guy. We don't care anymore. They'll do that a number of times as Zenkais, where it's like, oh, we don't really care anymore about Zenkaiing this character we might have been apprehensive about, because there's a clearly better option on the teams now. So that's kind of that's another thing they were doing. But I thought that some of them were really good. But really, I think when it started to uptick again, there were a few characters that really started to shine. This guy, very, very powerful Zenkai. I'm not going to spend too much time with him. Who else do I want to highlight here? The LF Zenkais have been all right. Like Vegito Blue, really good. You know, he didn't. There were Zenkais that didn't do much too, and he was one of them, but he was still really good. I think were really underrated. So the reason why Zenkais also got worse was because they stopped doing much to them. They would do the bare minimum. In fact, they're still doing that today on some Zenkais. Like Baby, I thought they didn't do anything to Baby. They really just gave him more damage and just called it a day. But anyways, they, with this character, added in a bunch of stuff. Like they added in Nullify Endurance and Blast Armor. I don't think they had either of those on this. I'd have to go back and double check. They added in a bunch of stuff there. And with Zenkais that were initially really good, like this guy back in the era of them all being good around the Gohan meta, Zenkais were coming out with stuff. Like this guy, I always go back to him because it's just crazy what they gave him. He has draw speed here. He's got all the healing he has. He nullifies endurance here. He nullifies covers here. Like they have, they used to give the Zenkais the stuff, you know what I'm saying? And then they just become nothing burgers with literally nothing on their kits. But I think that some of them had started to really kind of trend upward of earlier this year of note. And then we hit the green portion, and that's when I think really, because like we had got like Blue Piccolo, it's kind of whatever. Some of them had like Blue Piccolo had like one useful thing, didn't really have much else change, but they were okay because they had monstrous stats. And the thing about these Zenkais is they can still compete damage wise with or tanking wise if they have some of those like damage cuts or whatever, but they can still compete based on stats with most of the game. And you know, they'll get blown up by Gohan, but they should be able to compete offensively back to him on the other end, right? But when we started getting the green Zenkais, like this guy, you know, they started upward trending again. And there were some, like I said, like Great Saiyaman 1 and 2. I thought this guy might have been the best support character in the game for a short period of time prior to Tapion coming out. There was a few others that came out that were decent too. And then now we're at a point where they're starting to slowly but surely add in more of those effects. This guy might have been the best one of note recently, where they gave him endurance and just I think they gave him blast armor on his blue, and just they really started to up the scale again. But what I think it is that they got to a point where, because things that went such a reverse, where Zenkais were going down, new characters were going up, because most of the non-LFs, like the 1% characters like Green, Gold, and Frieza, for example, can just destroy this entire list. Most of the characters on this list anyway. The new LFs, Pan destroys this whole list. The new LFs just can destroy all this list, you know, but some of those other ones like Pan or Piccolo, maybe they don't destroy 5 characters, you know what I'm saying? But like recently I think they're starting to go back up with Zenkais for the most part, even though, like I said, the most recent Zenkai is who? No, it's not Baby anymore. He was the last one. He's old news now. It's this guy. And this guy, actually, they gave him a lot. I was actually impressed with his Zenkai. Honestly, I was impressed. I think they did justice by this guy. But like they started to say, okay, we're comfortable making Zenkais a little bit better again because LFs and stuff are just dominating the game. Imagine what it's like in a climate with Beast Gohan trying to create a competent Zenkai character. So that's why they're like, okay, we got to make these characters a little bit better now, because we again, as a trickle down effect, have increased power creep so heavily that these characters need to be better. So to summarize, I need a drink of water now. We started off with Zenkais. There were 21,000 CC. There's only a few of them. They were ultra good because of the new things that they introduced to the game, like the extra abilities, the Zenkai ability as well, the unique ability on Zenkai abilities, the extra stats, and all that stuff, plus the rework stuff that new characters weren't getting because they stopped doing balance changes entirely. So there's just a multifold thing with the introduction of Zenkais that is changing. Some Zenkais are duds. Most of them are really powerful, but regardless of if they were a dud or not, they were still good against the entirety of the field. That was a non-Zenkai character. They would blow all of them up. And then we hit a point where that hits a peak with the introduction of characters like Super Saiyan 2 Red Gohan Zenkai, Android 18's Zenkai, and there were some other ones throughout the way that were really good too, like Final Form Cooler, like I said, Beerus as well, that would define what Zenkais became before they hit their absolute peak with Gohan and 18. And then after Gohan and 18, they, I don't know if it was after them specifically, but they reworked the Zenkais overall, made them cheaper to obtain. And then slowly but surely, the Zenkais would get a little bit worse, then a little bit better, and they go on a seesaw method where they're going up and down, up and down. And then after that, Zenkais would become more free entirely, and then they go all the way down the slope, while LFs are going all the way on the opposite end, going all the way up, and new characters are going up and up and up. Power creep in and of itself. And then now we're at a point where hit or miss, hit or miss. Some Zenkais are really good, some aren't. But that really all, I think, with that peak was defining for this game, because like I said, I don't want to talk too much about power creep because that's honestly could be a separate video, but they really shot themselves in the foot with the Zenkais that dominated to that degree, like Purple SS3 Goku coming in and drawing that strike and doing all that damage. It was just meta defining. It was too good. Majin Buu's Zenkai was just too good. Some of those characters were just really powerful. So that is a detailed history of Zenkais in the game. Now, like I said, kind of hit or miss. Some of them are really good. I thought Pan was really good. But you know what kind of defines if a Zenkai is good or not is two things. Well, three themes. The team that they're on, the meta, and how many changes they got, right? Because in my mind, I think Blue Pan, like, she may not be as good as Baby. They share the same team naturally with GT, same color, same type of playstyle. She may not be as good, but I thought that she had so many defining changes, unlike Baby, that in my mind say she was a good Zenkai, even if she's not as good as another character that would be better on her team, if that makes sense to you. The amount of changes they give certain characters really, really varies. It just depends on how they feel, what time of this whole Zenkai sphere it is. Is it early? Is it later? Like I mentioned, Purple SS4 Goku is with and then also some newer characters like Purple Zamasu. He was kind of new when he got his Zenkai. He was like a year old, maybe. He really, honestly, he wasn't great when he got it, but he didn't need it, you know? So it just kind of depends on when they get their Zenkai too. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.